Day 3 of the July 99 7-day retreat in Springwater. Another beautiful day, cool and warm, sunny and shade. Lots of birds, airplanes rumbling. Breathing. And all that goes with it. You could single out this sensation and that sensation. In this location or that location. And that's what the mind does and is good at and is habituated to localize, to name, to know, which has its functions, uses. And yet there is another way of sitting quietly in which this whole localizing and knowing program is not there. It's just what's there is there, here, right here. Not separate, not out there, left or right, up or down. People tell me sometimes that happens, unplanned, unpremeditated. This marvelous feeling of no division. Everything here. No one there. That's the marvel of the moment, when no one is there. The place is empty and unoccupied by opinion and wanting and fearing and remembering and grudging, angering or pleasuring. Just the joy of absence of oneself for maybe just brief moments. And then maybe an anxiety-arousing thought. Where have I gone? Have I disappeared? Do I really want this? No, I really don't want that. I'd lose too much. Or later on, a doubting thought. Was this real? Or did I just imagine this? Probably wasn't real. The whole me network springing into action to maintain itself by throwing up doubts about this other, in which it does not function, in which it is quiet. Leaving this aside right now, not to make a thing out of it, which the mind does anyways, it wants that. But leaving it aside, sort of the main topic brought up in meetings is what to do or how to live with this Niagara of thoughts flooding the mind. hopelessly, as some people say. And then this stream that ends up right in the Niagara, I'm a hopeless case. I'm a failure. The others can do it, but I can't. And it's not just for if one is in the first retreat, it happens in the second, and the third, and the fourth, maybe in the 20th, 50th. Maybe one has gotten a little bit wise by the 50th, that this... that the mind, particularly if it has been very, very busy, very involved, very ego-involved, before one came here will just keep running for quite a while. So how can we live with this constant streaming back and forth, up and down of thoughts? And then the thoughts about the thoughts. And the frustration about not getting any place with it, which is more thoughts, all of that. Frustration is not just a physical thing. It is fed by thoughts that I shouldn't be in this state. I should be something else, someplace else. That's also what confusion amounts to. People say, I'm so confused about what's going on. Well, confusion is essentially what is felt to be going on shouldn't be going on. Thought says, that's not right, it should be otherwise. And because it isn't otherwise, I'm confused. Confusing lines and trains of thought, saying what should be or ought to be, and what shouldn't be. And little or no full attention to what actually is, which is nothing glamorous or spectacular. On day 3 of a retreat, it may be not much more than thoughts, 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 which some people call garbage. Because it's not only thoughts, because there is some awareness of the fact that this is going on, else one couldn't talk about it. And sometimes quite accurately, amazing how accurate people describe what's going on for them, and yet are in despair over it. How can there be, or can there be a switch from what is observed, the thoughts, the images, the emotions, the memories, anticipations, etc., a switch from what is being observed as one wakes up from this. Sometimes it's so involving there is no observation. But as one comes to, and this is what presents itself, this is what the mind and body have been busy with, can there be a switch from this involvement with the content of what is observed to quiet observation of what else is going on, beside this seemingly overwhelming flood of thinking? This takes a moment of coming to, which happens for all of us, all the time. No one is ever totally, forever, oblivious to what's going on. There is awareness. Here and there, call it what you will, attention, coming to, waking up for a moment. And at that moment, beware of not falling into another thought train, judging oneself, condemning oneself, bemoaning, comparing. The other people look so much more concentrated, so much more with it. Actually, this is how people look. most of the time when you look at them, they look as though they were with it or being with it. And want it or not, admit it or not, we are with this whole thing. Where else could we be? We're in thoughts, but we're still there. So, this switch from thinking, concerned about what we're thinking about or that we're thinking, to quiet observing, quiet listening, which is, you can interchange that, quiet attending, awareing. Maybe with that gentle question, what else is going on beside this stuff, which gets me so frustrated? And one may hear the birds or feel the breathing, which one hasn't heard or felt before, at this moment of some openness and wondering, is there anything else happening besides the thinking and the reactions to the thinking and the desire to be free of it or have an empty mind? The emptiness may start with emptiness of judging. The observation empty of judging what is being observed, or emptying itself of judging as it goes, as observation proceeds. Observing the judgment and letting go of it. It's not easy because it's an enormous habit, which by now is probably right in our DNA, to judge everything. Right and wrong. Good or bad. Good for me. We're in there as a reference point to be wise about that, to see that. It's interesting how practically everything is related to me by thought, image. I told a story recently. I'm just coming up again. It was a very powerful thing. Once in a retreat away from here, a teacher coming to this retreat. I was doing a teaching, a meditation teaching in a large spiritual center. At first, she was very unhappy and quite vocal about the fact that she did not get a single room because she was a teacher. Didn't they know that? It was not our staff assigning things. It was the staff of the center. And then one time, coming into a meeting, really like an ordinary human being, no role, no pretense, you could see it. And she said, you know what I just discovered? That there isn't a thing that I look at or hear that I don't refer to myself. I look at a tree and somehow or other I bring myself into the picture. Thought does that. And she said it with a lot of energy and the joy of discovery. Because when we really see something that's happening, then in that seeing there is no judgment, there is just energy flowing, joyful energy. It is discovering things about what's going on. So, to watch that, how important this self-reference looms and how it generates enormous quantities of thought. And that's said pejoratively. It is so. One can watch it when that is in operation. But it is not something that is inevitably in operation for human beings like you and me. There is an awareing which is free from self-reference, maybe just for moments at a time. And in that there is no right or wrong or good or bad. There's freedom to observe, to see, to be. So actually these moments happen on their own. I've never ever found a cause for this opening, for this presence. I've never found a cause. And reading the literature, everyone calls it causeless, unconditioned. Whereas for getting all riled up over something, with anger or fear or grief, there's a cause, and that cause is detectable. A memory, be it verbal or organismic, physical. Body remembers too by tensing itself up, knotting itself up, and then maybe coming upon such a knot, awaring the knot, and awaring may loosen the knot. And very often out dribble thoughts or feelings out of this tightly held knot when it comes into the light of awareness. Sometimes in the face one can watch all of a sudden noticing a tightness around the nose or mouth or a frown. Noticing it, and the tightness loosens and lightens, and sure enough there was some kind of a thought structure. I shouldn't. Good or bad, may not be very full of content, just these injunctions that inhabit our body. Do's and don'ts, rights and wrongs, since we were born. So, somebody, I don't remember the whole question anymore, but I do often say, behold it all, behold the whole thing, the thoughts, the judgments, the involvement, the frustration, and the birds. In the wintertime, we run into trouble because, well, no, we have crows, always crows. And the breathing is theirs, winter or summer. Behold it all. And somebody says, how do you behold? What do you mean by that? Find out yourself. I can't explain it. It is this openness of embracing, beholding. I think it's a wonderful word. But it's not the word, and it cannot, there is no technique to it. The only maybe technique is, or thing you can say about it is, come upon the obstacles, come upon the subtle resistances that this body manifests. It doesn't want to see this or feel this. People come in, somebody this morning, I'm angry, but I do not want to look at my anger. Amazing. So then, not I should look at my anger, but what's the problem? What is the resistance? What is the fear? Behold it. And it will reveal itself when the inquiry is genuine. It may not be genuine. It may sort of just be rubber stamped because one may think this is what you ought to do here. And it doesn't quite work. It has to come from a genuine desire to find out about oneself, an urgency, a need to find out about stuff that obsesses us, possesses us, like anger or fear. pleasure. But what is it all about, this? And I don't mean the joy of partaking of something, watching the birds or eating a good meal, being together, a beautiful day, the sun and clouds. But the thought-produced pleasure, memory-produced pleasure. To come upon it, that this is memory. There's nothing that's going on right now except memory. Of course, you may say, okay, it's memory, but it feels very good. Don't rob me of that. That's my only entertainment I have. Nobody's robbing anybody of anything. Just to be more wise about what goes on. And that wisdom comes with awareing. It's sort of like built into that. Maybe not a good expression, but I said it. And coming back to this observation that so many people look like they're here, they're with it, even though the mind may be playing havoc. There is something indescribable or unnameable. Even if there's tons of thoughts, and somehow, for better or worse, with frustration, without frustration, one is with it. Maybe not in the way one thinks Toni puts it or does it. Because why else would people ever come back to this place? Or step out of the house, as people do, and tell me the world is like transformed, the beauty of a branch with leaves and light on the leaves. People say, most people, it's much easier to be with it in nature, to take a walk. Look at the creek, listen to the bird. Yes, it is easier because birds and trees and creeks don't think. And it's palpable that they're not thinking. They're not imaging, they're not remembering, and it's sort of a relief to be with what is not thinking. When we are with people who are thinking, then it's very contagious. That's not thinking. Maybe it sounds as though it's laughing at us, but that's a projection. I meant the bird call. So maybe this easiness or ease in being with nature, natural things, is not completely unrelated to being with all the stuff here on a sitting cushion. Even though one feels one is no good at it, has no hope, and yet sort of enduring it, as it were. And at times, really being with it. Then the brain doesn't register it. That's why we can't really give ourselves much account of it. This is not unrelated to stepping outside and beholding the world in a new way. The gravel, the sound of a car even. And besides, one learns something. One learns about the effect of story. That it's much easier just to be with things. Easier, I mean, to move from thing to thing when there's no story running, that it becomes highly sticky when the event turns into a story, which the brain can infinitely embellish, falsify, if you will. and then living in that story and the suffering that comes with it, all the enjoyment. But we're more concerned with the suffering. People never bring joy as a problem. So this is, to me, is one of the most significant things to observe. Am I living in story right now or in touch with the facts? And to watch how quickly facts turn into story and the emotions responding to the story. Far away from the facts that are already over. It's already happened, it's finished. Of course, there are stories about ourselves that we believe tell us what we are. Unworthy, no good, or terrific. How do we know these things? It's the repetitiveness of the stories and the embellishment, the accumulation of more imagery about myself. And the fact that self-imagery becomes self-fulfilling. If we think we are a loser, convinced about that through countless past remembrances and image accumulation, obviously the energy is affected by that. Don't have to tell it. This is well known in psychological, psychotherapeutic circles. But then do we try to sort of build up a positive image to replace the negative image? Or do we thoroughly see the falseness of imagery, the inaccuracy or the irrelevance of it? It dates back to something that is not taking place right now. And maybe observing for oneself that we're not always like the image says, that there are situations in which something else flowers in us. Which has not yet been part of our image. The image is negative, and this is maybe, well, one may not allow oneself to really see that. How one can love and be in touch. One is not as hard-hearted as one thought one was, or as indifferent, or whatever, all the stuff that builds up in the mind. Dross, foul. So it's not just being with the whole 9 yards of thinking and emoting and reacting, but also understanding more about it, watching it intelligently, learning. Which lightens the burden, at least for moments at a time. The habits are not to be underestimated. Habits of how we think about ourselves and others. Very strong, very powerful. Great attachment to it. And with the attachment, an enormous defense system. Keep that stuff in place. I don't want to feel shaky about myself or the others. To sort of allow cracks to happen in this seeming solidity of our ideas and let the light come through. Fresh air. I want to briefly touch upon something that came up in a group last night, where somebody was relating having done in the past spiritual practice for 10 years or so, putting themselves through one doesn't even know what all, hard practice, and realizing one day that this all served a massive avoidance. And adding a little bit later, still wondering and questioning whether now sitting here in the sitting room is also an avoidance. Now it was toward the end of the meeting. We didn't really go into this fully. Something like this really needs to be looked at. What do we mean by avoidance? Avoid what? And I think we touched upon it yesterday, that not in connection with spiritual practice, although the connection was there. Avoiding to get in touch with painful feelings. And actually that particular person said that the Zen practice fitted perfectly with this tendency of avoiding to touch feelings, and here is a practice that says, never mind feelings, go beyond them. Don't bring them up in a meeting. That doesn't belong into Doksan, to talk about personal feelings. So it fitted very well with this learned habit to avoid feelings. I don't know whether this is what the person was referring to last night. But how? I don't know. How do you do that? And that's why we have to meet again. Tell me, how do you do that? Avoid. Now, here. Because there is no practice to hang the mind onto. Or is there still a subtle mooing? Moo, moo, moo. People sometimes tell me their belly is still mooing. Moo is something that you voice in Zen training, in a certain Zen training, not in all. Try to find out what this moo is. I can't fathom how without some machinations of the mind, some concentrative practice or repressive habit, how can you sit here and avoid anything? Let's come from a different side. Living a very turbulent life, very filled, very occupied, maybe with a lot of worries about people, relatives, loved ones, the people one works with, worrying about how do they get along with each other, will they, have they, all this kind of worrisome living that we have, that we're engaged in. What will happen? A thought arises, can arise. What will happen to my husband? What if he has severe pain, gets worse? Very, very worrisome thoughts. But one finds that being here, coming into this hall, sitting, or moving in a retreat, these thoughts do not arise. I said it the other day before the talk started. Not a worry in the world. What is there to talk about? What is there to think about? In other words, the worries of the world, if you want to call them, are left behind. That's possible. For whatever lengths of time, we're not talking about that. Now, I would never call that an avoidance. It's an enormously marvelous thing that can happen to a human being. And it is regenerative, healthy, healing, energizing, so that then when the retreat ends and you enter into the world of relationships and attachments, etc., there is some fresh energy to meet it. Because for a while there was a break from it. And actually people report this quite consistently, that in the course of a retreat, the worries that one brought and was so concerned with on day one, how abused I was or taken advantage of or this or that, they disappear. Paranoia lets up a bit. So is that avoidance? We have to talk more about that. Or is that just a very healthy way of breathing fresh air, which is unpolluted? And I'm not talking about using this quiet time in any particular way to keep something else at bay. Then there is a user and a doer and the stuff that is to be avoided. This is a very cut-up world. I'm not talking about a cut-up world. I'm talking about openness and permeableness. And what arises, and can arise any time, there can be a phone call or somebody bringing something to a meeting which concerns one's more inner ego-involved circle. Things may arise and not being repressed. They can be looked at in this marvelous openness here and light. Freshly. The birds have the last word. We will end here for today.